shit, I'm not in costume. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Danielle. I'm a writer, I'm a reader, I'm a student, and today I have a shameful confession to give to you all. Unfortunately, I am a fangirl. I know, it must be really hard looking at me to kind of assume that. I have traveled through the depths of super hulak throughout my Gen Z middle school age. I too have been an unfortunate victim of the fandom. However, I have recently found myself in another fandom, and that is Dungeons and Daddies. Dungeons and Daddies is a podcast about four dads flung into the forgotten realms on a quest to rescue their lost sons. I started listening to Dungeons and Daddies in, I would say, maybe September or October of 2020 during the midst of the pandemic. It was a clutch that I leaned on as I was going through my first semester of college, all online. It was something that I used to kind of act as like a stress relief, and it was also my first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, despite my board, is actually a comedy. It is stupidly comedic, it's so funny, and every single episode I end up laughing my ass off. So, why is there the word trauma attached to all of these characters? So today, my friends, we are going to be discussing how Dungeons and Daddies tackles the major theme of trauma throughout the four main characters and the consequences of their actions. The man, the myth, the legend, our favorite questionably conservative dad. How does he perpetuate the effects of trauma upon his kid if he never experienced it on his own? Quite frankly, he is the first domino to fall. This is Peyton Bennett. Peyton Bennett is the adoptive son out of all of these four dads, and he has the soul of Daryl's father. His father's soul is named Frank Wilson. This is Daryl Wilson. This is Daryl's son, Grant Wilson. Now, I think it's important to note that Daryl genuinely does love his son. Like, he would move mountains and earths just for him. He loves him to death. He would do anything. And this has been proven time and time again as Daryl continually and repeatedly sacrifices his life and gets into a whole heap of trouble, all in the goal of ultimately saving his son. Daryl is the first domino to fall, and I will say that it is not ultimately his fault. It is, quite honestly, a quite reasonable reaction to extenuating external circumstances. But ultimately, it was how Daryl responded to that crisis that gave Grant the trauma that he now deals with today. So coming back to the events of season 1, episode 1, Daryl is trapped into a blood pact, and he has to kill his son within the next 24 hours, or else him and all of the four dads will die. It's a long story. So then the gang's reaction is to turn Grant into a different person. They want to turn Grant from a boy into a man. And the way that they go about that is by having him kill a chimera and pretty much, like, understand the trauma of what happens when you kill your own meat. But all throughout this, like, before the 24 hours, before any of this happens, Daryl is understandably fidgety because he knows there's a ticking time bomb, and he knows that he has to kill Grant within the next 24 hours or else he's gonna die. So, and Grant picks up on this. I think this was really good role-playing on Anthony's part, where kids are smarter than you give them credit for. Kids aren't stupid. Kids can be just as smart as adults, if not more. And while Daryl is acting incredibly fidgety and lying and nothing is making sense, Grant responds accordingly, like anyone else would. In episode 18, you do ruin everything. You killed a guy, and then you lied to me about it. You don't tell me what the fuck is going on with you. Grant is given no information. He's understandably pissed the fuck off. In his line of view, it just seems like his father is lying and lying, and there's no real reason why. This would be frustrating on one occasion. However, Grant's following words seem to imply that this is a repetitive cycle that Daryl seems to feed into. Quote, "This is the most typical, you just put on a fucking happy face and just pretend everything's cool. Don't bother talking about it. Why would you talk about something that fucking bothers you? No, I'm fine. I'm great." So this is some very, very obvious foreshadowing on Anthony Birch's part. Not just because foreshadowing is obvious doesn't mean that it's bad. So Grant sees all of the flaws in his father, Daryl. And Daryl is ultimately having a lot of internal conflict. Daryl is struggling whether he should open up about the situation, but ultimately it's just going to freak Grant out even more, and it's his responsibility as an adult to be the responsible one. But at one point, at what point do you stop being responsible and you just start being secretive? it's not a good situation that they're in, and I want to like come to terms with that. That they are the four dads and Grant are not in the best situation at hand, and quite frankly, I don't blame him for anything that Daryl does in this situation. Grant might not, but ultimately, I think that it's Grant's view that ultimately relies on his father. Eventually, Daryl does open up about his frustrations and concerns about the following problem at hand, and Grant responds accordingly by freaking the fuck out. I mean, who wouldn't? Unfortunately, this openness doesn't last long, and it's only a matter of time that Grant takes on his father's coping skill of taking on a mask and giving the toxic masculinity and refusing to open up about his emotions. This happens perfectly in the next episode, in 19. So you see your son Grant in the middle of the pool of blood, of viscera, of guts and blood and vomit. Nothing, by the way, also portrays Grant's impending generational trauma in this scene. Quote, "It's choking and it's coughing and it's hacking up blood, and he just stands over it and he stares into its one remaining eye as it coughs, as it hacks, and as that one remaining eye eventually closes and it dies. Daryl, you alright? Grant, everything's fine." In this scene, at that exact moment, we see the moment that Grant takes on his father's generational trauma. So Grant's trauma is unique in the sense that none of the other kids kind of suffer with the same thing that he does. It's kind of implied that he's suffering from some type of dissociation, and I believe in season 2 at some point Anthony makes it canon that he does have PTSD from the event. The first and only time that Grant opens up about his emotions is to his crush Yeet in episode 35. Ever since then, I've felt kind of, or I guess not felt is sort of more of a thing. Like, I kind of just don't feel anything all of the time. Like, I don't feel like I'm a person. This is a distressing statement on its own, and I personally have dealt with similar emotions. It is incredibly frightening and stressful to feel like you should be feeling emotions that aren't coming. I don't think that it's fun nor productive for me to play armchair psychiatrist when my only qualifications are a marine biology lab, but I feel like it's not too much of a stretch to say that he has some type of dissociation, and insultingly simplified terms, dissociation is when you feel like the world around you isn't real. This is even further commented on by Grant when he says, "And if I could do that to somebody, or if I get hurt, then it's like, I'm here. It's like this proof that I'm still here and that I'm real." End quote. This shows that Grant can only feel emotions when he is committing great acts of violence, or great acts of violence are being committed upon himself. That is incredibly concerning, especially for a kid. I mean, who wouldn't be concerned about that statement? Although Grant doesn't open up too much to his dad, Daryl is a father. He knows something is wrong with his kid, but Grant knows that his father can only relate so much. His dad can only help so much, especially in this specific scenario, where Grant says the following: "The whole time that I've known my dad, he's never come off as like, I never seen him scared. I never seen him cry. I can't even really relate to him." This is a fantastic example of external circumstances contributing to intergenerational trauma. Daryl made the quite simple mistake of lying to that one sorcerer. I believe that was his class. And that created the domino effect of Grant to deal with the ongoing generational trauma given to him from his father to mask his emotions. And I think that this is really great to show that Daryl Wilson is not solely to blame, because you understand where he's coming from. It's incredibly easy to empathize with him. In this situation, it's no one's sole fault for the consequences of generational trauma that is going to go on between Grant and his son until eventually, hopefully, someone in the Wilson line will start to break that. Daryl Wilson is not the only character to suffer from generational trauma. However, Henry is the only dad to suffer from a literal family curse. This is Henry Oak. He is our crunchy munchy hippy dippy nature druid dad. And these are his two sons, Beryl and Lark. And this is his father, Barry Oak. So Henry Oak literally receives a family curse from his grandmother, who was around in the 1920s, and she is eventually transported to D&D land. This curse kind of shows itself as, quote, "And the static, the grain, it's seemingly gone, except you can see that there's a little a little bit of it in one of her wrists, in the veins traveling under the skin. A thread of static and decay coursing through her veins like blood. In episode 42. End quote. And it is my opinion that this static is literally a generational curse, but it is also representative of intergenerational trauma. I believe that this generational trauma is the Oak family's idolization of perfection. This is Henry. Henry's grandmother meets a handsome elf. They have Barry. Barry meets Autumn. Barry and Autumn have Henry. And we do know that this static passes on genetically, because Anthony states in the static that film grain that was in your grandmother and then down to your father, you see it passed down from your father into you, and again, it grows stronger, and it grows a little bit more chaotic. This static being passed down from family represents a gradual loss of their humanity. And in that loss of humanity, I believe that there are two choices that the individual Oak family can make, and that is self-actualization and self-introspection. Barry steps into self-actualization. Into the cult craze of 70s America, what do we think of when we think of a cult leader? We think of charismatic, arrogant, incredibly intelligent, which Barry fits all of those. Henry, his father, this larger-than-life figure who can command crowds of people with just his voice. End quote. Now, we don't know much about Barry's upbringing, but we do know that he greatly admires perfection. Again, this ongoing theme of perfection. And Barry sees perfection in nature and seeks to recreate it. Quote, Barry learns how to shape the world. He finds a tree he considers to be perfect and he replicates it over and over. And he makes a forest out of this one perfect tree. And he attracts people to the forest who are just as interested in finding perfection within themselves as he is. Barry treats himself as nothing short of a god, and it's little wonder why Henry seems to fall short in his father's shadow. Barry is obsessed with perfection, but he believes that Henry will never truly achieve it. Quote, Barry believes, and he tells all his followers this, that perfection can be achieved, but what Henry is, as of yet, incapable of doing so. End quote. How heartbreaking is that, to have your father, the man who is supposed to love and protect you unconditionally, to tell the public of people that look up to his opinion, that his own son falls short of perfection. It's a tough situation to deal with, and I wholeheartedly sympathize with Henry Oak in this situation. So as Henry experiences hurt over hurt, there is one situation where he seeks to fix what Barry could not make perfect, and that is when Barry breaks a magic mirror. Quote, Barry is furious, and thinking that he's alone, he punches the looking glass as hard as he can, and he shatters it. But he's not alone. A young Henry is watching him from the shadows. Episode 42. This is the moment when Henry follows in his father's footsteps and steps into self-actualization. Henry mirrors his father, all while looking for approval. Henry is repeatedly trying to prove to himself and to his father that he is good enough, but he always falls short. And then Barry's obsession with a perfect world in nature, and then Henry's obsession with perfection in himself. It is this very same static that gives Henry the vigor to fix his father's mistake and to fix the broken mirror. And after many, many years of experimentation, of secret study, of hiding away from his father, of sleepless nights spent by candlelight as the static, the noise, the grainy anomaly inside of him grows larger and more erratic. After many years of that, success. End quote. Henry has finally managed to complete the grand rite of his family line. He has achieved perfection. He is perfection incarnate, and he knows that his father will be proud of him. He has achieved the penultimate of self-actualization that his father was always striving for but could never truly achieve. Henry is immediately punished for stepping into self-actualization. He falls into this magic portal and is put into the non-magical Earth realm, and he forgets all of his memories. I believe that the show is trying to tell us that self-actualization is on the negative scale, and that self-introspection is on the positive. And I will be further talking about the self-introspection part in the following minute or two. And why do I believe that Henry achieved self-actualization? In this quote, Barry approves of his son. The look that comes over Barry is not one of anger or frustration or even of concern for where his son has gone. It's a faint smile. Maybe. The thing that made Henry special, maybe that came from Barry. End quote. Now this obsession with perfection, I could spit bars. Now this obsession with perfection, it is ultimately passed down from father to son. And as Henry's amnesia is slowly but surely healed throughout the events of the campaign, Henry starts to gain his humanity back. And he starts to create his own version of perfection that is separate from the ideals that his father imposed on him. he steps into self-introspection. This part actually serves to show that the Oak lineage's obsession with perfection, but is also that Henry is stepping into self-introspection, which is the higher tier of humanity that we should all be striving towards. Quote, Henry, because the thing that's inside you, that's inside me, it scares you the way it scares me, and I'm angry because I can't control it. I don't think I'm perfect. I don't think I'm better than anyone. I think I'm fucked up, and I think I'm a broken man. End quote. I've been listening to the show since the beginning, and you can bet that when Henry had his final character arc, I was dancing. I I remember the exact moment. I was driving home from work, listening to it in the car, and I had to pull over and just stare at the empty fields of nothing grass. Henry Oak isn't my favorite dad, but his character arc is definitely my favorite. Henry has finally achieved self-introspection. Let's go! Henry stands up to his father, rejects toxic masculinity and self-actualization, and instead steps into self-introspection. Not just for himself, but for his sons, which increases the themes of fatherhood. Oh, Henry, Dad, I can't carry hate for you in my heart. What does that teach my boys? I just told them they got to love everybody, which means I had to love you. And I do love you, and I don't want to fight. What an amazing dad. Only it would have been worth something because Lark eventually does give into the temptation of stepping into self-actualization. It's a tragedy unbeknownst the world has ever seen. Henry is an interesting character because he does all that he can to break the generational curse that is going to be passed down from father to son, and he does everything right. But even still, his son Lark still steps into self-actualization, and you can see the exact moment that he kind of forgoes self-introspection. And this happens in season 1, episode 59. Quote, Anthony, you can feel Sparrow hold you and hug you back, and you can feel Lark not do that. And in this moment, your mind is cast back to when you first drew from the deck of many things, and the rogue card came up, and promised you that someone in the future would hold a grudge against you. And you now know in your heart that that person is your own son. End quote. In that moment, Lark's personality seems to take on a drastic turn. His innocence is lost upon seeing this great act of violence in this new world, and it sucks. It sucks. It also affects him heavily in season 2, but because this is supposed to be a spoiler-free episode from season 2, I will keep it vague from now on. He steps into self-actualization in season 2, and he doesn't look away from it. That's all I'm gonna say. And they have to pay some deadly consequences for it. That's all I'm gonna say. If you know, you know. But ultimately, Henry does all of this emotional labor, and for what? For naught? I don't think so. I still believe that Henry's attempt at breaking the generational curse was still useful, even if it does ultimately get passed down from father to son. This Oak family serves to show that you can do everything right. You can do everything you can to break the generational curse, but sometimes there are things just outside of your control. And that can be one of these things, like the genetics part of it. You just can't escape that, unfortunately. And this generational trauma, it might not go away entirely. It might skip a generation. In this case, it seems to have done. But I hope that in season 2, Lark gets the positive character arc that I believe that he genuinely needs. Concluding the Oak family, we transition now into the Close family. This is Bill Close, father of Glenn Close. Glenn is the original father to Nick. They experience a time warp. Now Jodie Foster is the father of not Nick Close, but now Nicholas Foster. It's a weird triangle we got going on here, as I tried to explain it. If you never listened to the series, you definitely should. Have I convinced you yet? There are literally several episodes dedicated to proving that Glenn is a bad father and doesn't deserve to have his son, Nick. And you know what? I agree. I mean, one can hardly blame Glenn. He clearly didn't have the best example growing up. Quote, Bill, Glenn, remember that scam we used to run, the Salvation Army with the Santa and the Elf? In episode 47, end quote. It's pretty clear that Bill is a scam artist. I mean, Glenn even says so. every interaction we have between Bill and Glenn, it seems to prove that they talk about their past, and every single time they talk about their past, it seems that Bill references some type of scam that they pulled. Quote, and even Glenn knows this. He says the following: "Now I know my dad well enough to know that he's always trying to pull some other angle on this sort of thing, so I don't necessarily fully trust him." End quote. Episode 47. Bill clearly failed to instill any sense of morality nor responsibility in his son, Glenn Close, and it is Nick that suffers the repercussions of that. However, for Glenn also suffers the repercussions of that, because it must fucking suck to know that you can never rely on your father. Wanting to be a parent is arguably one of the most selfish things that you can do, but it's bizarre to me that Bill says it with so much gusto in episode 46 or 47. I believe that Glenn Close is ultimately trying to appeal to his father, even still today, but I believe that Glenn, deep in his heart, knows that he can never truly gain his father's approval, because his father doesn't really care about him, and he knows that, and it sucks. There is clearly a sense of generational trauma in the sense of neglect that results in the whole Close family not really having any sense of morality. However, hear me out. The lack of morality, I would argue, also appeals to a lack of authority. Now, hear me out. I don't mean respecting authority, like the pillars of government and oppressive power structures. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about just this family structure that we got going on here. Not like respect for others, respect for yourself. I argue in this scene that Glenn Close is trying to appeal to his father, and Nick follows in Glenn's footsteps. Glenn and Nick don't really have a father-son relationship. It's more like friends that you hang out with. Not even really close friends that you can be vulnerable with. They're just friends. They're not really father and son. And that is because Glenn never had a good example growing up for how to be a father, because Bill Close was his father. Glenn had no idea how to be a father to Nick, and the only way that he knows how to be a father is to care for him. But it's about it. You don't even really need to show that you care for him, you just need to do it. Bill taught Glenn to dismiss all responsible parenting as nothing short of narcs, which when Glenn becomes a father and he sets that example for Nick, it's a recipe set for disaster. Actually, the first time that Nick called Glenn by his first name in episode 7, I about flipped out. That's not right. Freddie Wong is Asian, I am Asian. Calling an elder by their first name, I about lost my shit at that point. I was gobsmacked. That was by far the most controversial thing that this show has ever done. Nonetheless, we see time and time again that Glenn fails to be a father to Nick. Demanding the proper amount of respect and requesting the proper title to be called is one. Another one that sticks out to me is when they finally rescue all of the kids from the purple robes. All of the kids are clearly shaken up and starving. And all of the dads, they're like, "Oh my god, what happened to you? Are you okay?" etc., etc. And checking up on Nick for Glenn is an afterthought. And Glenn doesn't even seem to see that Nick's hands are shaking. Quote, "Glenn, oh, by the way, you good? Nick, am I good? Am I good?" This guy asks if I'm good. Anthony, he fist bumps you with a trembling hand, but he tries to immediately steady it with his other hand. End quote. Episode 30. And Glenn does absolutely nothing. I couldn't believe it. This isn't even a matter of being a good dad. He's not even a good friend. Nick being taken away from his father, Glenn, it was ultimately a good thing, because quite frankly, Nick suffered zero consequences from it. His memory is wiped clean. The only thing that he knows is from his narc dad. The space-time continuum blip does absolutely no damage to the kid, and does all of the damage to Glenn, who has to live with the consequences of his actions. And quite frankly, I find it difficult to be sympathetic towards him. I don't think that Glenn is a bad person, nor do I believe that Glenn had any bad intentions. I believe that Glenn wholeheartedly loved his son, but he didn't know how to show it. Bill was his example. You would understand why Glenn acts the way that he does. But ultimately, Glenn put an insurmountable amount of pressure on Nick to always be the cool and fun guy at the party, so that they're never able to be emotionally vulnerable with one another. And I feel like if we can't get on the same page as physical neglect, we can at least get on the same page that Glenn emotionally neglected his kid. And as stated before, we see that Glenn is also the victim of neglect. Bill was his father. Bill neglected him. Glenn was a father to Nick, and unfortunately, Glenn neglected Nick. And that all ties back to the themes of intergenerational trauma, passing from one father figure to another and to another. And ultimately, I think that if Glenn did get Nick back from the trial, it would only further encourage him to continue what he's doing, and he wouldn't change his actions. I believe that Nick being taken away was a good thing. I think that the distance is good. It gives Nicholas and Glenn some time and space to be just friends. Like, they can be the cool uncle and cool nephew together, and it's fine. But ultimately, Nicholas needs a father figure in his life, and Jody fulfills that role. Glenn's positive character arc is realizing that he is not a good father, rather he is a far better uncle to Nicholas. And it warms my heart that that happens, because it takes a true astonishing amount of humility to come to terms with that. Glenn is a shitty dad, but he ultimately made an even better and amazing uncle to Nicholas. And in accepting that role for himself, he has stopped the cycle of intergenerational trauma. At least it would if in season 2, Nick would have been a better father, but no, he can't be, because he has to be cool and badass. Doesn't this entirely just get rid of the whole section that I just made? I'm so confused, I don't know what to do, this whole thing is incredibly confusing. I'm applying a literary analysis lens to a fucking Dungeons and Dragons podcast. What am I doing with my life? What am I doing? Oh there, kid, have you lost your mind while trying to write a Dungeons and Dragons video script? Well, do I have the solution for you. I have this amazing fishing lure. Don't you want it? You can have it. Here you go. Oh, no! We're out of time, sport. I'll see you later. Ron and Willie Stampler. In my arrogant opinion, one of the most interesting ones. I feel like it's not that difficult to tell who's my favorite dad. So Willie is the father to Ron. Ron is a stepfather to Terry Jr. Willie is the BBEG of BBEGs. Anthony did a disgustingly fantastic job of writing in a fantastic villain to be scared of and also to despise. I love Willie almost as much as I hate him. So Willie Stampler was very obviously based off of Willie Loman, who is a main character in Death of a Salesman. Death of a Salesman is this classic play written by Arthur Miller. Beth even said so in a dad fact in episode 31. I read the play a couple times. I watched it again for the sake of this video. Too pretentious for me. And thankfully, we don't have to talk about the play because that's all his name serves as. It's just a callback. Death of a Salesman episode does follow a similar construction as Death of a Salesman the play. So, nonetheless, that's a fun trivia fact. I mean, I'm an English major, but I don't do plays. I'm a lit nerd. I'm no thespian. I have to get laid sometimes. However, thankfully, there isn't that many similarities between Willie Loman and Willie Stampler, so we can save doing a compare and contrast analysis essay, and instead just do this Dungeons and Daddies essay. Unique in the sense that he doesn't love his son, like Frank and Daryl. He doesn't hate his son, like Barry and Henry. He doesn't like his son, like Bill and Glenn. Instead, Willie feels nothing short of true apathy for his son, Ron Stampler. And this is revealed in episode 60. Quote, "Whatever that strong tether is between the two of you that anchors you down in this world and anchors him in your life, then I am so sorry, but the box is empty." And Willie whispers, "I just don't give a shit about you." Excuse me before I do my cogent argument, but let me just... Oh my god! We're doing good, folks. We're doing swell. I mean, to know someone that you love, the man who is supposed to love you more than he loves himself, to give anything in the world for you, he knows that you are nothing but scum at the back of his boot. It's incredibly heartbreaking, this scene. Ron, he grew up in an intensely neglectful and abusive household, and you can see parts of his childhood in episode 61. One of them is, quote, "Younger Willie So your dinner's on you. I'll probably be back at like 8, 9-ish. If she talks a lot, I'll be back. Just fucking just young Ron. Is there anything in the fridge? Younger Willie. Hey, who gets to find out? It's you! And of course, the saddest scene of the entire series. Who can forget when Willie makes Ron get rid of Rogue, their family dog? And this is Ron's mother speaking. Quote, your father is a complicated man, and I'm not, but he does bring home enough money. End quote. That line in particular stuck out to me because Willie is an incredibly highly controlling person, and he knows the exact amount of power that he rules over the family with. It was really hard to see Willie abuse his power over his child and his presumably disabled partner. This is why I love Willie as an antagonist, because it's so easy to hate him, and it's also so easy to be terrified of him, because he exemplifies all of like the bad villain stuff. Like, would he kill people? Yes, he would. But ultimately, he is just a horrible person. And we all know someone like Willie in our lives. This podcast is really good, y'all. Y'all should listen to it. Ron's home life is a hurricane of turmoil and trauma. It would have been so easy for Ron to have followed in his father's footsteps. You know, hurt people hurt people. And although Ron's relationship with his father is incredibly turbulent, he never commits the same acts to Terry. Ron knew that he wanted to be nothing like his father, even from a young age, and he committed himself to that, and that's an incredibly admirable trait to do. During the scene at the Tower of Terry, Ron says the following, quote, and Willie, never ended up being proud of me, but always thought that if he were really my dad, then he would have been proud of me, no matter what. And so, I think that people who are related to you, maybe they're your father, maybe they're not, but sometimes your family is just who loves you. And if you think that your family is gone, they're not all gone. I still love you, and I care about you. And I'm sorry that you're feeling like this, because I've felt like this before. And it fucking sucked. End quote. Episode 14. My heart. Ron in this scene is condemning everything that his father represents, everything that his father is, and he is committing himself to being a better father, a better man, a better person for his son, Terry Jr. Ron's empathy is truly astounding in this scene, and if there was a fantastical representation of an animation of this scene, you would have seen the metaphorical chains break from Terry Jr., and then perhaps there would have been a white light that would have traveled from Ron to Terry Jr. Animators, you know what you gotta do. Out of all of the dads, Ron is the one to break generational curses! Yes! Oh, shit. Never once does Ron raise his voice at Terry. Never once did he express disappointment with Terry. Ron loves his son, and he is nothing like his father, and he should be proud of it. And Terry doesn't emulate any of the shititude that Willie does to Terry Marlowe in season 2. So Ron broke generational trauma. He did it! This is gone! Except for the other dads. The other dads are a different story. But for Terry and Ron, they're doing good. That is how Dungeons and Daddies tackles the themes of intergenerational trauma and the consequences of their actions, good and bad. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed. I am hoping to post more videos like this. I really enjoy video essays. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. And if you would like to see more, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe. I'm trying to post new videos every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next week. Okay. Bye! By the way, I'm not wearing pants, I'm wearing pajama shorts. But they have hearts on it to make it look like underwear, because if I am anything, I am committed to my character.